In the next 5 years, 1 billion people will have Bitcoin. I think by the end of this year, 200 million people will have Bitcoin. We're adding them at 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 million a month. Right? That's how fast it's going. And so we're going to get to a world where billions and billions of people have a wallet, and they have money in it backed by Bitcoin. And it doesn't matter whether the Lebanese currency collapses or the Turkish currency collapses or the Venezuelan currency. And it doesn't matter whether the euro weakens by 15% or the dollar weakens by 50%, because as people put their savings account into the bank of Bitcoin, into that bank in cyberspace, they protect themselves from the currency weakening and the currency collapse. And they have sovereignty. It gives you economic sovereignty. It's a way for you to store your own monetary energy, your life force. And you can store it for a decade, for 100 years, for 1,000 years. You can pass it to your kids and your kids' kids. First time in human history. So what's really exciting is individuals have a way to shield themselves. If God invented a perfect place to store all of your life savings, she would invent Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin is the solution to the problem because it is the apex property. You can't inflate it away. It's a global monetary network for people that want to store their economic energy for the next 100 years. So it's the solution to the problem. That's why it's exploding in value and in popularity. The total amount of public companies with Bitcoin on their balance sheet was $2 million in February. Then we did it, and then we bought 250 million and 500 million and then 1 billion and then 2 billion, and then Square did it and Tesla did it and all these other companies did it, and it became an issue. And then all the big investors started to notice there's a problem with conventional bonds and cash instruments. So Ray Dalio says cash is trash and bonds are negative yielding. And he's the largest hedge fund owner in the world. So all of the macroeconomic speakers, they all started to speak about this subject after March. We're 1 year in, there's an avalanche of institutional interest. 1,000 institutions get in. They all have a voice. They all talk to each other. Just 2 days ago, Howard Marks said, you know, I was wrong about Bitcoin. Now I understand why the world needs scarce assets in a monetary inflation environment. And he's well thought of, and now hundreds of other people running institutions with large pools of money start to notice. As the early adopters move, then more adopters move, then institutions move, then all these billion-dollar entities move. The mainstream media started to cover the story differently after February 8th. February 8th was like a big date when Tesla announced they bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin. Now this started hitting in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. It started showing up in Fortune and Forbes and everywhere in the world. And people said, well, maybe there's something here. We got to pay attention to this. Generally, politicians and conservative large bureaucracies will be the last to embrace this, but it ripples, right? From the visionary entrepreneurs to the early adopters to the macroeconomic investors to other investors, to, you know, first the techno media, then the mainstream media, then sparks fly, a little bit of smoke, a little bit of controversy. Now you got to have an opinion, and it's going to be injected into consciousness. I think this is part of the healing process of a free market. Look, there are two ways it can go. One way it can go is in an environment where there are no property rights, where you have an authoritarian government and no property rights. They just keep printing money until they collapse the currency. And when Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and when the currency completely collapses, the economy completely breaks down, because if the currency breaks, you can't trade. And you're reduced to basically Stone Age barter, or Iron Age barter. That's one direction, not a good one. The other direction is in an open free market, capital flows from the weak assets to the strong assets. And as the capital flows, there's a redistribution of power and awareness. Price discovery has disappeared in the bond market. What that means is you have $100 trillion of bonds and bond type instruments, and they're overvalued because the Federal Reserve is printing money to prop them up and buying the bonds. Price discovery has disappeared. The yields have all gone negative. And that means that no rational person is going to buy a bond. Like, why would you buy a bond that yields 2% interest if the money supply is inflating at 15% a year, and if the purchasing power of everything is falling by 15%? If you hold that bond for 10 years, you'll start with $1 million and end up with $100,000. And if you hold it for 20 years, you'll start with something and end up with nothing. Rational people are not going to buy that weak asset. The capital is going to flow from the weak asset to the stronger assets. There's a lot of uncertainty and risk. And so what's a better idea? A better idea would be, what if I could just buy digital gold in cyberspace where no one can make any more of the gold? I got 21 million virtual gold coins in cyberspace. They're on a global network. Nobody can make any more. And there's no CEO, no company, and no country to screw it up. And nobody can take this away from me. I can take personal custody of my digital gold. And that's what we call Bitcoin. Why wouldn't I want that? Well, it's perfectly engineered. Like, well, maybe it'll be hacked. We wait 12 years. It hasn't been hacked ever. Maybe it'll be banned. Well, actually, it's property by the IRS and the SEC in the United States. It's not banned. And when all these institutions buy it, it's not banned. It's property. It'll be here for the long term. Well, maybe it'll be copied. Well, it's been copied 10,000 times. Nobody was successful, right? Bitcoin is 100 times bigger than Bitcoin Cash, 200 times bigger than Bitcoin SV. And so the dominant digital network with $1 trillion of money in it, that's probably the bank in cyberspace that we're all going to use. And 120 million other people made the same decision. So I have a problem, which is, where am I going to store my life savings? I have, at this point, only two choices. I can either put it in the stock market and buy a high-tech company that's going to grow fast. So ultimately, what's going on here is, you either have to put your money in the stock market and guess on high-tech, high growth, and that's a challenge, but you can do it. That's the popular solution. Or the other solution is, I put my money at a bank in cyberspace, the bank of Bitcoin. It's run by incorruptible software, and it offers me a global, affordable, safe, secure savings account for a person that neither has the means or the inclination to run their own hedge fund. And that, in essence, is what Bitcoin is. That's why people are stampeding into Bitcoin at the rate of millions a month. Well, 10 years ago, you didn't have Bitcoin, and the best idea you had was gold. And so if you look at the Weimar Republic, when you have absolute power and they just print the currency and it collapses, the entire regime collapses. And everybody's best idea is, I hoard gold. If you look at Zimbabwe, eventually the economy collapses. If you look at Venezuela, the economy collapses. When you don't have an option, the currency collapses and people are left destitute, and sometimes there's revolution. And I could make a list of all the bad things that happened in history because the money got debased and the economy collapsed. What I'll say is, I will offer an optimistic future. There are two things we have today we didn't have then. One, we have 6 to 7 billion people on the planet with mobile phones. And a mobile phone is a mobile computer in your pocket, and you have them in Africa, and you have them in South America, and you have them in Asia, and you have them in the US and Europe. And the second is, we now have $1 trillion digital monetary network called Bitcoin. Anybody in the world with a mobile phone can download an application, and they can start to take custody of their own money, and they can hold it either on their mobile phone, or eventually they can carry it on a hardware wallet, or if you can't get a hardware wallet, you can put it in your head with the seed phrase. But the most practical use application is, I simply, instead of buying gold, Jake, it's not very practical for you to buy $347 worth of gold. The markup is extreme. It's going to take a long time. And eventually, if somebody knew you had it, right, it gets shipped to your house, or you buy it, they put a gun to your head, they take your gold. And how are you going to pay for anything with a block of gold? So it's not really a practical it's not a practical way to store money. It was the best way we had for 5,000 years, but it's not a practical way. Bitcoin is like oxygen. It's an antidote to a toxic currency. And at the point that billions and billions of people start to avail themselves of it, then irrational actions by government have a check on them, and then that becomes part of the conversation, and people go, oh, maybe we should think twice. Maybe we can't just double the currency supply. If you want to live a good life, you have to accumulate assets, and those assets have to be strong assets.